What's going on, everybody? It's Jack Hillgrove from 93.7 The Fan, and this is Breaking Bread presented by Cellone's Italian Bread. And I'm pleased to be joined with somebody that I've broken bread with quite a few times. My grandfather, voice of the Pitt Panthers, Bill Hillgrove. Pap, happy to be with you to sit down and enjoy some delicious food.
Well, I really appreciate the invite. Anytime there's food involved, I might be close by. But it's great to be with you again.
Now, you've had a full year pretty much of the partial retirement. Have you gotten the sense that it's been a little bit more refreshing at this point in your life to kind of dial back and just focus on the Panthers?
Yeah, I think the key word is dial back. You know, I did the double duty for 30 years, and between the travel being more of a challenge and the fact that I'm not getting any younger, I just decided that to do one of the jobs was going to be sufficient, and so far it's worked out well. Now, to that point, on Steelers Sundays, my role has changed into a fan, and so now I can holler at the TV set, just like other people do, and I can even say words I haven't said in 30 years, because they're not on the radio. Yeah. But no, it's been good, and I look forward to another season.
Now, I remember when you missed a couple of games at the end of the season when you had your back operated on, and we were out at the house watching a game. I think they played on the Ravens at the end of the year, and I had to catch myself because it was me sitting on a couch watching the Steelers, and it was a live game, and you weren't there. Did you have to kind of have that? Because the first home game of the year, you were up in one of the suites. Was it weird to be in the stands for the first time for one of those games?
A little bit different, and but you know, I enjoyed the experience, and again, it's so much fun to root for the black and gold and wave the terrible towel. So, you know, I got into it very easily and quickly. It's fun, and that's what it should be.
Now, this will be year what for you for Pitt, football and basketball?
Boy, you're causing me to think.
I try to do the math, and
I think basketball's coming up on 56.
Yep.
And football, I started in 1970 with Ed Conway, and then 74, after he passed, they gave me the play-by-play. So I think play-by-play now, it's in the 50s.
So the 69-70 basketball season was your first basketball season. So in 1969, Pitt basketball opened up at Rutgers. What do you remember about that game, if anything at all? Because that would have been your first broadcast, wouldn't it have been?
Yes, it was. It was the old Rutgers gym. It was loud. I remember they had a curtain to try to cut some of the sound going through the gymnasium. And that's what I remember about it. But, you know, it was kind of thrilling to jump on an airplane and go cover a basketball game. I hadn't done that since I was a student in college, and we went to St. Francis or the War Memorial in Johnstown. That was a big road trip.
Yeah.
Well, here I am on big time and everybody on an airplane, and that was kind of cool.
Did it take you a minute to kind of settle down and get some jitters out?
A little bit, but you know, I've been blessed with tunnel vision, and once they throw that ball up in the air, you know, you kind of focus on only that, and you try to tune everything else out.
One of the things that I've been most impressed with about you is your memory and your knowledge throughout the years, so I'm going to test that. Year one, 69-70, who would have been the leading scorer for Pitt basketball that year? 16.9 points a game.
I think you got me stumped. Two names that come to mind, Paul O'Gorick and Mike Paul, Bill Downs. Was it Cleveland Edwards?
Does Kent Scott ring a bell?
Oh my goodness, how did I forget Kent Scott? He went 11 for 11 at Carnegie Mellon. I don't know if anybody's done that since. Perfect, you know, maybe Blake Hinson might have done it.
Yeah.
But, oh yeah, Kent Scott. We played at Fordham that year, and I remember walking out of the subway with him up the steps, and there all of a sudden is New York. And he looked around and he went, wow, just like Raytown, Missouri, which was his hometown. I got a chuckle out of that. That was pretty fun.
So obviously from there, your career blossoms into what it was, and you spent a decent chunk of it on television doing TV sports. So talk to me about the transition from a real full radio background and then into TV and what that was like, and as you gotten, cemented into being, one of the faces of Channel 4 News back in the day.
Jack, it worked out very well. And as you know, because you do both, there's a big difference.
Yep.
And, you have to recognize that at a young age and embrace whatever qualities that are going to get you, through the day. And I was fortunate that the timing on almost everything was almost uncanny. The boss coming to me when I was a disc jockey and asking me, have you done play-by-play? And I said, yeah, as a student at Duquesne, I did a little bit of high school football and a lot of Duquesne basketball. And as a result, he said, okay, we're going to get the games away from another station and you'll do Pitt basketball, which hasn't been on the air since the Don Hennon days regularly. And Ed Conway will do the football, but he can't travel, so you'll do the traveling for basketball. And you'll help him in the booth. And so that kind of got that foot in the door and got my sports hat on. And the timing couldn't have been better.
Now, in TV today, especially with me having friends at the station I work at and other stations, everybody's trying to move up from market size into top 50, top 25, whatever. Did you have those opportunities? And if so, what made you stick around in the Berg?
I never thought about it much. I was married.
Yep.
I had a child. And I remember talking to Ray Scott, and I was fortunate enough to befriend him when I worked a little bit at Channel 4 way before I was on the air. I was a cable pusher and a tour guide and a switchboard operator. And I got to know Ray, and I kind of picked his brain. And he said to me, Bill, one of the challenges that I face as a so-called national sportscaster is the travel. He said, next year I'm looking at 250 travel days. And he said, I think it's a strain on my marriage. And he later went through a divorce, and I'm kind of glad that I never thought to go that way. Happy in Pittsburgh, happy to be doing games for a team I grew up rooting for. And I felt when I got that job, boy, if I do this for the next 20 years, that'll be cool. Well, it's been a little longer than 20 years.
Ray Scott was one of your role models, influences in the business too. What about some other ones? Who else did you look up to when you were an
Ed Conway was a mentor. And one of the things that he told me when he did the play-by-play, he said, watch the official. I've never forgotten that. If you watch the official, they'll tell you a lot that you can't even see. And, the prime example of that for me was the Ben Roethlisberger touchdown pass to Santonio Holmes in Super Bowl 43. I'm at this end of the stadium doing most of the game to my left, and he's on the far sideline. So I can't even see Santonio, let alone his feet. But I watched the official, who was from me to you away, and as soon as he caught the ball and did the toe dance, I saw the hands of the official come up to his waist, and I said, they're going to go all the way up. I called touchdown. And I was kind of proud of that because I was guessing, but I watched the official. That was one of the great things that Ed Conway taught me.
You talk about having tunnel vision throughout the broadcast, and that's obviously super important, but throughout the game, throughout that game in particular, okay, this in the second quarter they're going that way, fourth quarter the same thing. When Larry Fitzgerald scored that touchdown, and then it was however many minutes left, 2.5, whatever, and you know that the Steelers are going to have a chance to go on a game-winning drive in the Super Bowl away from you. Is there a moment where you had to be like, okay, buckle in, here we go?
Well, what I remember about that drive is that Ben put the football on the hands of a Steeler receiver every single play. And they overcame a holding call coming out of this end. And, Santonio should have caught the pass to the left side of the end zone. And Ben didn't, he didn't flinch. He went right back to him in the right side of the end zone, and the rest is history. And, one of the greatest plays ever, but it might be the second best play in that game. James Harrison's return was, I think I had him down twice. I might have had him out of bounds once too, but it was crazy.
What are some of your other memorable games? Maybe not the ones that the fans remember the most, the championship winning moments, but some other memorable moments throughout your broadcasting career.
When Troy Polamalu intercepted that pass against the Ravens and took it back for the score, that's the only time that I lived in fear. It's the only time that I could feel the press box at the then Heinz Field shake. And I was afraid that we'd fall out of the sky down to the ground. And fortunately, it didn't happen that way. That was memorable. Not too many others really jump out at me. Just Super Bowl plays. Of course, there have been a couple that I'd like to have back, including Mendenhall's fumble. Yeah. If it weren't for that, I think the Steelers win that game. And go back to '95, the game at Sun Devil Stadium. The Steelers had that game won. The second half, Bam Morris just ran roughshod over Dallas. And they controlled everything. And Jerry Olsofsky, who played in that game and was later a Steelers coach, said to me, Billy, he said, you could see the quit in the Cowboys' eyes. They wanted to just jump on a bus and get out of there. But unfortunately, the quarterback, Neil O'Donnell, thought he saw some things that didn't exist. And the next thing you know, Larry Brown is a big hero and a Super Bowl hero, and signed then the biggest free agent contract that the game had seen, and was never to be heard from again. But, those are the memories you have, and they never leave you, thank goodness. Some of them are unpleasant, but they're there nonetheless.
And I know obviously you still follow the Steelers despite not being the voice of the Steelers anymore, but one of the guys that beat the Steelers in one of those Super Bowls is now their quarterback in Aaron Rodgers. So as that kind of situation was unfolding, what were your thoughts as he was playing the waiting game, and now that he's going to get set to be the starter? What do you think?
At first, I was negative on the whole thing because I didn't think he wanted to play. I thought that he really wanted to retire. But now that everything has happened the way it has, he's been a good teammate. And I think he's also embraced his role as a teacher for Will Howard. And, I kind of like that. And, let's face it, Jack, you go into every season, there's 6 or 7 quarterbacks in that league that can take you to the Super Bowl. And he's one of them. And so let's see how it plays out, but I think it's been a great ad. I know there's a lot of controversy around it. Sometimes his personality gets in the way, but I think he's been a good teammate, and I think that's augurs well for the Pittsburgh Steelers in 2025.
Back to you a little bit. You've worked with a plethora of partners, beloved radio personalities as well in this city. Talk to me about being able to adjust to Myron Copes and Craig Wolfleys and Pat Bosticks. Everybody brings something different to the table. What's it been like adjusting and playing so well off of each one year in and year out?
I think sometimes the chemistry you develop is not just on the air, but it's off the air as well. And fortunately, in the case of Myron, I had previews. I had worked with him operating the switchboard at TAE Radio for games. I had worked with him when he did the commentaries. And people forget, in 1983, we did a whole season of Pitt football together. When Johnny Sauer wasn't cleared by the doctors to broadcast, Cope jumped in at the last minute and did Pitt on Saturdays and the Steelers on Sunday. And I got a preview of the hum-has and the yoys and double yoys that really, put me in good stead when we started our first of 11 glorious years together.
So with that, little out-of-the-box question. out of all the broadcasters that or partners that you've had, if you had to be stranded on a desert island with one of them, who would it be? Now, my thought on it is this. You could go a couple of different ways. If you're really trying to survive, like Johnny Sauer was a West Point guy, or do you just accept your fate and do it with cope and ride it out for the comedic relief? Or is there somebody else?
Well, let's start with Dick Rote.
Yeah.
I was with him for 40 years, and he always had your back. And if somebody's in a foxhole, that's who you want to be with. And I treasure those moments. I miss him every day, but I miss them all. Myron became a pal. I played golf with him. I had him on my boat a couple of times at Conneaut Lake. Tunch and Wolf, just superior human beings. Bill Fralick, a lot of laughs with Bill because he had that dry sense of humor. And I remember a couple of times that we had a myriad of on-field, helpers, and they were on the air as well. And it's just the way it worked out. And sometimes they'd say something outlandish, and I could see Bill with his finger on the cough button, leaning back and going, ha, 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 ha. And then, being professional, leaning back in and saying something very dry. I miss him too. So, I've been fortunate to have so many different personalities that I developed chemistry with. And, I always felt my job is to do the nuts and bolts. Their job, I tell you what, they tell you why. And so, as long as you respect that, and I think I've pretty much done that, it works.
What about some of the people that you've had the pleasure of meeting, like any big-time celebrities throughout the years, any stories about maybe outside of, the realm of Pittsburgh and people that are local celebrities?
Well, I had the pleasure of interviewing Bing Crosby when Three Rivers Stadium opened in August of 1970. And that was a thrill. He's Gonzaga's most famous alum. A lot of people, if you ask that question, will say John Stockton. No. Bing Crosby was a Gonzaga grad, and he couldn't have been nicer. I got hollered at by Dan Galbraith afterwards because I didn't ask his permission to interview the owner or part owner of the Pittsburgh Pirates. But he couldn't have been nicer, and he waved me in. He said, come on, we'll do that. Because I just showed him the mic and the tape recorder, and come on. That's probably as big a celebrity as I've ever had the pleasure of interviewing. And maybe my favorite all-time Steelers interview was Terry Bradshaw. He's still the same guy that he was then. I've been kind of lucky in that regard. Some other people, oh gosh, I don't know if you remember, I know you don't, it's before your time, but there was a guy who appeared on television shows. He was a humorist. What's My Line? He was on that. He was always on the panel. His name was Harry Morgan, a very funny man. And I covered him in my radio days for WKJF, which was my first job. And he spoke at the Hilton Hotel, and afterwards I came up to him and I said, Harry, could we do an interview? It's a little noisy here. Let's go out in front of the hotel. And we're out in front of the Hilton Hotel, and I'm facing the hotel, and he's looking this way toward Mount Washington. And I started the interview, and he said, excuse me, can we stop? I said, sure, Harry, what's up? And he pointed to the top of Mount Washington and said, why don't the rich people live up there? Well, guess what? Now they do. And then it was row houses, and it was just more Pittsburgh, only at a higher elevation. And, that was kind of memorable. I've been very fortunate to be around some talented, some funny, and certainly some famous people.
How about anybody that you wish you had the opportunity to interview or meet along the way that you didn't get a chance?
Oh, I often said that I'd like to have dinner with Artie Shaw. He was always a fascinating guy to me. Certainly, his 7 marriages is one of the interesting aspects of the man's personality. But, he was a great musician, and not only a solid band leader, but Artie Shaw was a great clarinet player. And many jazz aficionados considered him the best clarinetist to come along in modern popular music in America ever. He was sick of the business, and I admired him so much because he put the clarinet down and didn't touch it for the last 40, 50 years of his life to make a statement toward the business. To me, I admired that, and I always wanted to meet him, but never had the chance.
You love jazz.
I do.
So well, how did that kind of shape you as a person, and where did that start?
Well, it started when I was a student at Central Catholic High School. A good friend of mine, Don Adams, who later was on the faculty at West Virginia, was a really bright guy. He said, would you like to go to a Dave Brubeck concert? And I said, yeah, I think I've heard of him. He said, well, I have an extra ticket, let's go. And we went to Carnegie Music Hall in Oakland, and I'll never forget, the sound in that place was unmatched. The acoustics were perfect. And I remember hearing the alto sax of the great Paul Desmond as part of that great quartet, and it really hit me hard, like, wow, this is pretty special stuff, and it got me into it. He got me into the Four Freshmen, which I'm still a big fan today, so, you know, in a way, I kind of bypassed the advent of rock and roll, which was the 50s, because I was probably more into jazz and big band, but I don't regret that one bit.
You got to do some radio shows centered around jazz too. What was that like for you? In addition to being, you know, Bill Hillgrove, the voice of the Steelers and the Panthers.
That was fun. I was first told that I could do my show, which was 6 hours of pre-taped, in an hour and a half. And I said, well, I can give you an hour and a half a week between my busy Pitt and Steeler schedules. But it turned into, do it right, it took 7, 8 hours. And I did it, I guess, for 10 years, and I enjoyed it. But then, you know, I had to make a decision. I'm getting older. I don't want to keep up this frenetic pace. And so I reluctantly gave that up. Now that I'm semi-retired, I'm thinking a little bit about trying to get back into it, but it's not high on my list of priorities.
What about some of your favorite travel destinations throughout the years? I mean, we're talking about Hawaii for Pitt basketball back in the day, some trips overseas, and then, you know, the traditional rivalries of the teams as well. What are some of your favorites?
Always enjoyed the city of Baltimore. That's always a fun trip. Always enjoyed the trips to Cincinnati, because across the border is Covington, Kentucky, and there was a jazz club there that I really loved, and I'd Uber to from the team hotel. You know, those are two of the favorites. And I guess, you know, I can't ignore the fact that I've done both a college and a pro football game in Dublin. That was pretty special. And the Steelers are going back again this year. I can't be there, but I'll be there in spirit. And I do know that Pitt's going to go there, I believe, 2026 or 7, we play Wisconsin over there. I'll look forward to that.
And with our family's Irish heritage, I'm sure that was really special for you too, to get over there for work.
It sure was. And I remember the year our cousins took a trip with a travel service to Ireland, and we were in Dingle, and we had extra time at lunchtime, so my cousins and I said, let's try to find the Hillgrove Hotel. We knew there was one there, and it was up this long hill, and we started walking, and this woman came out of the house, and we said, is that the way to the Hillgrove Hotel? She said, sure. She says, and I'll take as many as will fit in my car. And she took a whole bunch up there. And then I guess the last 3 of us walked the rest of the way. And they were waiting as we got there. We walk in, there's nobody at the front desk.
You show them your IDs? You show them your ID, like that's my name?
Well, no, but all I did was hit the bell, and the guy came out and said, could I help you? And I said, yeah. I said, did a guy named Hillgrove ever own this place? And he got a wry smile. And he said, well, we're in the Grove section of Dingle, and we're high on a hill.
Okay.
And I said to my cousins, we found our roots. And that was kind of a special time. Yeah, I'll go back to Ireland at the drop of a hat. The people are just so friendly, and if you ask directions, they're liable to take you there, and nothing wrong with spending some time in a pub.
As we have broken bread, has there been any memorable restaurants, meals that you've had on the road, maybe repetitive ones that you say, oh, we're going back here, I'm going there to have this?
Yeah. There's a place in Syracuse called Joey's. I've been there with Bill Raftery and Sean McDonough and Dick Grote. And that's always memorable because the food is good and the people are very accommodating. When we go to Florida, there's always a Don Shula steakhouse somewhere that we can go to. I'm just trying to think. Back in the early part of my basketball days, we traveled to St. Francis, and I was able to eat at a place called Ercolini's, which is long closed. And that was an Italian restaurant where you didn't order off the menu. You just sat down and they started bringing food. That was kind of memorable, that place. I took my late mother-in-law there, and she just enjoyed it because she was Italian.
Yeah.
I can't think of any other outstanding restaurants. Well, in Hawaii, yes. But, that's one of the great things about sportscasting is if you travel, you get to spend that off the air time. And it's often educational, and it's a great experience, and it's fun being out of town.
Everybody always talks about how great the Marinos, Dorsetts, Ditkas, Aaron Donalds of the world are for Pitt. Football, basketball, there's been so many great ones. Is there a football player or a basketball player off the top of your head that you can think of that you say, they don't get talked about enough, but boy, were they a special player?
Well, let's go with football. Matt Cavanaugh was very important to that 1976 Pitt National Championship season.
And I feel like he kind of falls through the cracks because of how fantastic Tony Dorsett's season was, Heisman Trophy winner.
I remember doing a banquet with him once, and we're walking into the place, and I said, Matt, are you going to keep your remarks brief? And he said, oh yeah, but he said, I'll make my major point. And I said, what's that? He said, it was my pitch out. It wasn't Tony Dorsett's ability. It was my pitch out that made him great. And, moments like that just kind of stick in your head. Matt was kind of a guy that's overlooked because you hear about the Dan Marinos and, some of the great quarterbacks that they've had. But for the Steelers, unsung. Andy Russell. He was such an important part of those Super Bowl years. And he also, along with Ray Mansfield, were the holdovers from the same old Steelers, the days where they were lovable losers. And, he was just, I have trouble putting it into words, but I remember talking to him about the transition between the same old Steelers and the foundation for what became, I think, the greatest franchise in the history of sports. Those 4 Super Bowls in 6 years, and it should have been at least 5, and we all know the reason for the one they didn't go to. The injury to Franco Harris and to Rocky Blair, and they went to war with Boobie Harrison, but that's neither here nor there. Andy, I said, well, what was the difference between the previous coaching staff and Chuck Noll? And he said, Billy, it was obvious the first day of training camp, how disciplined everything was, how rigid the schedule was, But it passed the time quickly because you went from one thing to the other, bang, 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 including the Oklahomas. And he said, and then there was the meeting that evening, our first meeting with Chuck Noll, and he stood up and said, gentlemen, I put my thumb on the reason that this has been a losing franchise. He said, you guys stink, and that's going to change. And you know what? That just stuck with me. I could just see Noel saying, I can't live with this level of talent. We got to do a better job, and boy, did he. And, you know, those were the years where not many scouts attended a lot of the black schools' games. But the Steelers had Bill Nunn, who, because of his duties with the Courier, you know, knew all about many of those. And the Steelers drafted some people in lower rounds that today would go high. John Stallworth would be an example. Sam Davis would be another example. You know, Mel Blount. They got those guys as so-called bargains because people didn't have footage on them. And now, you know, the footage is available. That was a special time. I didn't broadcast for them then, but I covered them for both radio and TV, and certainly enjoyed meeting and being around the Andy Russells.
What was the story of John Stallworth? Wasn't it something to do with his 40 time, and then they had him rerun it?
They ran it at Alabama A, M, and N. I believe that was his alma mater. And it was a notoriously slow track, and Bill Nunn knew that. And so when he crossed the finish line on the 40-yard dash, the scouts are looking at their watches going, oh my gosh, you know, 4.6 plus, you know, that's pretty average. And he waited till they all left, and he said, John, you got a moment? Yes, sir. He said, can we run you in the 40 again? I know a track across town that may be more conducive to your God-given speed. He said, sure. Well, he took him across town and he ran a 4.4 and change, or maybe slightly over a 4.5, and nobody else knew it except the Steelers. And that's what Bill Nunn brought to them. And of course, those days are gone because the video's available. Yeah. It's on the internet everywhere for everybody.
So, one of the hot topics in town always is, especially with how many great broadcasters that we've had in the city, are who's on the Pittsburgh broadcasting Mount Rushmore. I'm biased, that's no secret. You're on mine, of course, but I want to know, maybe of all time, who is on Bill Hillgrove's broadcast Mount Rushmore?
And I'm going to be subjective myself. Ray Scott, although he wasn't considered a Pittsburgher. He did the Green Bay games, but he was here, and he's from Western Pennsylvania, so I call him a Pittsburgher. Ed Conway should be up there. But, you know, I mean, the obvious ones, Bob Prince, Myron Cope, Mike Lang. You know, Mike Lang and Doc Emmerich are two of the best hockey announcers that I've ever had the privilege of hearing and seeing. And one of the things they had in common, they could, you know, hockey is, there's a lot of, I call it falterall. There are a lot of meaningless plays in hockey. And they had the ability to eliminate those for the viewer/listener and just give you the important things. That's quite an art, and I've never tried hockey, but I'm kind of glad I didn't, because first of all, I didn't grow up with it. And secondly, you know, it's maybe a little too fast for me.
What about baseball? You have given that a stab, haven't you?
I played it better than any sport. And when I grew up, I had a ball field practically next door to my house in Garfield, Fort Pitt Field. And from that field, I could see the lights at Forbes Field at night. And as a kid, as twilight would set, and I'd look at those light standards and say, you know, I'd like to be part of that someday. And I thought I'd be a Major League Baseball player. Well, heck, I wasn't the best player in my neighborhood. How was I going to be a Major League Baseball player? But I kind of got there in a very roundabout way, and maybe in an indirect fashion, but, you know, I've been privileged to be able to say to my boyhood compatriots, hey, I was the voice of the Pitt Panthers. I was the voice of the Pittsburgh Steelers. But to put me on Mount Rushmore, I think that's a little hasty on your part, Jack, and that's the end of the scolding.
Fair enough. Throughout your career too, like, and you talk about how lucky you are, right place, right time, but in addition to that, like myself, my dad, we were around as spotters for a really long time, and you get to travel with your brother for Pitt basketball games that are broadcasted on the Fan. So what's it been like being able to live a lifelong dream and be the voice of your childhood teams, but be able to work with, family members and people that you hold near and dear?
I remember, and I won't name him, but there's a local sports celebrity who once said to me in front of my brother John, well, the Hillgrove name, I hear it coming from, football booths and basketball broadcast. There's a lot of nepotism there. And I felt like saying, well, yeah, but if you grow up with family, these are the people you trust. And when you're in an important job where you have to get information quickly and process it, you got to have people you trust to do it. But when I think of that word nepotism, I remember Art Rooney Jr. when he was inducted into the West Penn Sports Hall of Fame. First thing out of his mouth, he said, "Hi, my name is Arthur J. Rooney, and I was the director of scouting for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I got that job through nepotism." And, that kind of put it in perspective, because even to this day, he's still a scout, and he still does that, and does it at a very high level. Hey, what people think, Mike Tomlin said it many times, don't let it define you. What's important is what you think about yourself, your self-image.
What about, and there are some, young people that work at the Fan, myself included, and young people everywhere trying to break into this business. And nowadays, and it's incredibly cutthroat. So, like, what are some of the biggest pieces of advice you have to young broadcasters trying to make a name for themselves?
If I do a career day, and I do it in my alma mater, Central Catholic, every year when I can, two things. Number one, be versatile. Because as a young person, you really don't know what you want to do. Now, I was kind of an exception because I found out at the age 13 that I had a gift for this side of the microphone, and I was able to combine that with my love of sports. But I had to do news, public relations, staff announcing, disc jockey, and then finally it worked out for me. So, be versatile. That's number one. Number two, be yourself. I think too many kids will seize a national sports broadcaster and say, I want to be just like him. They want to be the next Bob Costas or next Al Michaels. No. Oscar Wilde, the great humorist, said, be yourself. Everybody else is taken. And if you are yourself, your talents will come to the front, and you'll figure out what you want to do and what comes easy to you. And I think that's how you build a career. Those are the two main things.
Before we wrap it up here, I'm going to put you on the spot. Let's get predictions for the squads this fall. We'll do the Steelers first, but we'll start with Pitt football. And I think the one that's obviously on a lot of people's minds is on 9-13, the backyard brawl in Morgantown. How do you think the Panthers fare?
I think the Panthers are much better defensively. I think offensively that line is better. And so that augurs well for good results. I think the Panthers and Pat Narduzzi will go to a bowl game, which unfortunately didn't happen last year. Pitt basketball will be better. People say, well, they retooled the roster. Well, in this day and age, that's probably a good thing. You get rid of the people that haven't helped you, and let's face it, last year their performance was underwhelming. And so I think they'll have a winning season. And the Steelers, it's going to be interesting. Stay tuned. Aaron Rodgers, DK Metcalf, Okay, they might need a receiver on the outside. I think Calvin Austin does a good job from the middle of the field. Who's going to be the running back? No, it's not Najee Harris, obviously. I don't think Jalen Warren is going to be the main guy. He's always that good changeup guy. So that remains to be seen. And defensively, I think they're deeper up front. Obviously, Jalen Ramsey's going to help that corner spot. And now they have 3, including Joey Porter, who's got some older guys around him and in that room that can help him develop. I like them. At first, I didn't like the Menka trade, but the more I looked at it, the more, I felt this, and I think a lot of fans also. Menka did not fit the 3-4 as we run it in Pittsburgh as well as he should have.
Yeah.
And so maybe for him, that change of scenery is going to help him. So I'm kind of optimistic for the Steelers. As long as they beat the Browns twice, I'll be very happy. Beat Baltimore once. And if they can beat Cincinnati twice, that'll be a successful year. That division, to me, is still the toughest. And if you get a bid out of that division, you can go a ways in the playoffs. And I know they haven't, but, it's time for the worm to turn.
All right, Pap. Thanks for sitting down, breaking bread with us, presented by Cellone's Italian Bread. Always enjoy when we get a chance to spend some time together.
You think you had fun? I had more.